Good evening and welcome. My name is Edgar Pieterse. I'm based at the University of Cape Town. I work at the African Centre for Cities and have the enormous pleasure and honor to moderate what I believe is going to be an amazing discussion because I've lived in their heads for the last 2 weeks, reading their words, and it's been profound. The theme for this session is structured violence and alienation of the urban, both past and present. And it is very difficult to come up with a more prescient idea given the moment that we are living through. I just want to have one advertorial that this session is sponsored and promoted by the African Literary Cities Project, which is led by wonderful colleagues at the University of Cape Town, Laura and Paulo. I think they're somewhere in the audience. And this is the third year with the support of the NRF that they've been promoting this work. So as someone who's come of age during the apartheid South Africa and who grew up in a pretty rough neck of the city, Eitzig and Elsies River, and sort of was ushered through activism and had my stint in detention and kind of emerged on the other side in democratic South Africa. One of the things that I think we never really understood or appreciated or expected was the insidious nature of violence in particular and the capacity for cruelty that was embedded within our society, not just within the oppressive apparatus of the apartheid state, but I guess insidious because it was textured into the fabric of family, of religion, of education, of every facet of daily life. And in some ways, this was the true evil of apartheid and colonialism. And we are absolutely living in the aftermath of those particular dynamics that continue to structure interpersonal relationships, very importantly, intimate relationships, and of course, societal complexities. We've got 3 amazing books that illuminate dimensions of this, both the aftermath, but also those moments of living through the terror of state-sponsored violence. And across these 3 books, we also move across time. We move from the early 70s to the now. And this amazing book by David called Hell of a Country, and they all have amazing titles, by the way. I don't know if that is your brainchild or you've got fantastic editors. I'm envious. Is set around, the conceit of the book is an infamous murder that happened in the early 70s that David will tell us about. But the book is so much more because it's really about uncovering the raw veins of people who struggle with themselves and struggle with the idea of healthy and meaningful relationships. We then jump all the way to contemporary South Africa and in some ways democratic South Africa. Nthato's book, Ghost in the Drum, provides an exceptional and unusual and such a profound meditation on what township life and township urbanism means when you appreciate that it is constituted through music, through sound, through the constant production of innovation and invention through music that anchors people, provides relief, but also in some ways provides a soundtrack to becoming in a society that doesn't have any future for you, that doesn't have anything available but truncation. And then we've got not a novel, but it reads like a very, very scary thriller. It's a little bit between a horror story and a thriller, Man Alone by Caryn. And it tells the story of just what happens when a society like ours is unable to make up its mind whether it really, really wants to instantiate a radical democratic experiment committed to accountability and transparency and trusts that that transparency and accountability is what will allow us to become what in our greatest aspirations we want to believe we're capable of. And it tells the story of when that is not allowed to flourish. when in fact the trails of deception, deceit, corruption, and most importantly, murderous intent becomes encoded between the pre-apartheid and the post-apartheid security establishment and all of its connections with the dark underbelly of our cities and our country in the form of cartels, gangs, and so forth. And so I want to start, because these three books come at our topic in such different ways, I want to invite each of the panelists to give us a brief synopsis of their work, of what they've put into the world, through the prism of this idea of structured violence and alienation. Maybe we start with you, Nthato.
My book, Ghost in the Drum, speaks of TC as this, Tisela, the protagonist, as this ghost. He's a ghost and a shell of what he wished to be, but also from violence that has been perpetuated in the past. He's, an aftermath in a sense, and he has no full agency to determine his future because he's a product of the hell of a country. And township, I guess, it's the way to talk about it in two ways. An element of township life is very loving, very close. There's, depending on the age of the township and how long people have been living together, there can be immense support and, what people now refer to vaguely as this kind of community. Yeah, you can find community, but the real warmth of it that you can ask, you don't even need to ask. That's what I'm talking to, that it becomes this extended family. But I think from outside, there's the perspective of the other layer that is then coming from maybe outside sometimes. A lot of the time, I mean, with the military and hippos, that level, that was outside. For me, my first nightmares as a little baby, as 4 years old, 5 years old, was about Eugene Blanche and hippos in the streets and the soldiers in Soweto. And so that becomes the level of structured violence against a level of really home and warmth and security. And so my novel, Ghost in the Drum, is Tisela's sense of running away from home, thinking that he's going into this great world that has everything, but finding the real community in his township.
Thanks, Nthato. And before I ask to invite David, this idea of a coexistence of really loving intimacy and care with the capacity for cruelty is an interesting, sort of reality that I think actually sits across all three books. And I think it is something that really speaks of the contemporary condition in South Africa. So I'd love us to later circle back to that, but just to sort of note that, that comes through so painfully and almost frustratingly, in your novel, and in particular because TC perpetrates that as well, right? So he's, it kind of comes through in especially in his intimate relationships, yeah. But David.
Thank you so much, Edgar, for setting up the topic so nicely. It was wonderful to hear you talk about all our books. So yes, Hell of a Country is a fictionalized retelling of the Scissors murder, sort of a national scandal in the early 1970s. But hopefully, I've been able to use the format of the novel to make it about more than that, and to really kind of try get into the history of the time, the power dynamics of the time. And so this crime occurred in Cape Town. We were talking about traumatized cities, and this was a time of course, violent dispossession. The forced years when a lot of Cape Town's been it's got a long history of violent dispossession, right? Right back to the 17th century. But it was a period of intense period in the early 1970s, where the book book takes place. So there's a lot of trauma and alienation that works through the characters, both consciously and maybe even more interestingly, subconsciously, in the way they feel almost sort of fated or compelled to act out some of the sort of tensions and dynamics that Edgar was mentioning earlier.
Yeah, so Man Alone was really me. It's a product of me struggling as a journalist in a sense, because we report on incidents or themes. And what I realized over many years as a journalist, and I've been in the industry for more than 20 years now, is that nothing is separate. So I can report on a shooting here, and it turns out that the shooting there is linked to something that happened in Parliament, or some politician said something, and this is, on this end, it's linked to something that happened in another country. And I think what got me is that it always boils down to politics. So the book is told through the eyes, or it takes you on a journey with General Andre Lincoln. He was an intel operative under apartheid. He then became a police officer in democratic South Africa. And then if you believe him, and I say this not to disbelieve him, but he was an intelligence operative. So if you believe him, a lot of those he believed were his allies who were not, which in effect, and I'm going to say this in a nutshell, means that the democratic South Africa we've been sold doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. The individuals that have put us into this position right now have not been open and honest. We know that. We've seen that through so-called state capture. I say so-called because it couldn't have just ended in 2018. So the book really takes you on a journey, and it goes from, and I mean, I wish it was fiction. I really wish it was fiction. It takes you through so many murders, drug cartels, drug trafficking, politicians' names keep cropping up, intel operatives, intel agents, etc. And it just reiterates how we've always been captured, especially when it comes to a law enforcing lens. So South Africa's policing arena, without a doubt, has in a sense always been captured. What is the product and the result of that? It's what we're seeing on the ground. It makes me want to cry when I do this during these talks, because frequently now, in fact, the last 3 or 4 talks I've done, I've said, oh, the first message on my phone this morning was about a shooting, a fatal shooting. I said this yesterday, it's not a lie. I'm saying it again today, it's not a lie. We are in Cape Town, people are dying. In July, there were 270 murders recorded at just 30 of the 150 odd police stations in this province. This is a problem. If we're talking about traumatized cities, this book should traumatize you. It's told through the eyes or the experiences of one person. That is one person. Multiply that by 270 families. And that's why I've done this book.
Thanks, Caryn. I mean, your theme takes me, to I guess, to this very issue of how do we inhabit violence, right? In the sense of, and I guess for you to help us understand that. And I'm reminded of literary works from Cape Town as well, that I've been wrestling with for a long time. The one novel is 13 Cents by Saludeka, about a homeless street child who, sort of has to navigate all of the horrors of what it means to be in that position of acute vulnerability in Sea Point and getting enrolled in the sex economy. And the other is a collection of short stories by Ashraf Jamal called The Shades. And what both of those pieces do is that they, and Ashraf has said this on occasions, that for him to talk about hope and despair is the wrong question. It's the wrong spectrum to think of, because it misses the point that you've got to inhabit and sit with what this violence means, in the sense that you've just said, the 270 families, the 2,800 extended families, the larger communities, et cetera, et cetera. What does that mean? And, and in a way, the way you sit with, and I kind of got annoyed with you a little bit as I went on TC's journey with him, and he's kind of, from one city to the next, he's making it, and he's just the self-sabotage that you capture so powerfully. And and obviously as a manifestation of all of that uncertainty and alienation that you were talking about, that searching for what, right? And he kind of rediscovers, is this really everything I was looking for? Lorraine, your main protagonist who commits the murder, spoiler alert, sorry, I should say that before, spoiler alert, who commits the murder. You know, she's equally, we kind of live with her. She gets pulled into this vortex, and I don't want to use the word madness, but it's a kind of an unhingedness, right? And a loss of perspective as her obsessive compulsions kind of just take hold of her very being, and reality becomes something else, gets completely distorted. And, you know, Caryn, in your case, you know, just going into all these murky zones with SAPs, with the gangs, with the bouncers, with, you know, I mean, there are so many questions that I have about how you do that craft. But the point, that what I'm asking you to do is to maybe share with us, you know, what does it take for you personally to live with these dynamics and realities, to inhabit them, to think through them, and to then put them into a story, into a narrative, into words. Just what is that journey like, if that's something that you're willing? I don't know, Caryn, can we perhaps start with you and go in the opposite direction?
What a question. Like, I don't actually have the words. Like, I feel like I'm still in it because I don't stop writing. I'm a journalist. But, I mean, it's utterly bizarre, and I feel like it's weird because I feel bad because I'm doing this from a position of privilege. I'm writing about, not external because everything impacts us, but it's weird. With this book in particular, I felt, and I told General Lincoln that I felt horrible. It's horrible sitting there sort of dissecting someone's very traumatic past, which is taking a physical toll on them right in front of you. So that, it wore me down on a emotional, mental, physical level. And then as you're looking broader, I had this sense that I was naive. I was very naive when I started out as a journalist, and I still am a little naive, but you realize that we're still in a state of capture. There is no quick fix. The roots that were sort of embedded then are strong and hardy. So there was also a huge sense of, I was like, we're stuck. I feel hopeless. I don't want to be doing this same kind of writing. But at the same time, if you really read that book, the resilience of individuals and people and minds and what we can create with literally nothing, and what we are able to do and able to achieve despite people taking away from us in a very targeted way is phenomenal. So, I mean, that prevented me from going mad.
But I am curious, I mean, so the book is exhaustive in a way, and part of, I guess, with your journalistic training, you know, you incredibly precise and specific and clear when you've got evidence, when you don't, when it is surmised, when it's, et cetera, et cetera. So you must have read and reread and edited and re-edited like 1,000,000 times to get it to that level of precision, right? Which is kind of really what your book felt like to me. It was this artifact that was so carefully sculpted. So I'm kind of, you know, so that kind of implies a wanting to get it right impulse, right? And so maybe say a little bit more about what that was like, that process.
So because I was focusing on an individual who was an intelligence agent, and because these arenas are very murky and blurry, and because of it's the weirdest thing, I like endnotes. So I'm meticulous with them. So that was actually the easy part for me. That meticulousness it comes naturally, and I want to prove to you, I don't want to give you a substandard, I'm going to use the word product, it's not a product, this is really a piece of someone's heart and life. But I wanted to show you that I'm not making this up. And it's really important because someone's life was spun off course in ways that you can't be okay with that. And there's proof that this happened. So even though a lot of people say, oh no, that person's lying or that person didn't do this, there's a lot of sort of, the textured layers of proof. And I wanted to present that to do not just you, a reader, a service, but also the people and the main person I'm writing about. And that is my duty.
Thank you. David?
Yes, so that wanting to do it right really sort of resonated with me, because it is an uncomfortable thing to write someone else's story in a sense. You know, it is a novel, but it is of course based on a real life tragedy. So it was yes, quite a daunting thing to take on. And in the end, I decided the best thing I could do is just to try put forward an account of that might invite understanding rather than rejection. You know, at the time, it was a media scandal, but it was kind of, you know, it didn't invite any kind of introspection. It was something that people wanted to push aside and go like, oh, look at this kind of freak occurrence, without actually thinking about how the society might have engendered a crime like this. Specifically with Lorraine, I found that my way into understanding how she could be capable of a violent crime was shame, and the centrality of shame to maybe, you know, not all violent crime, but certainly I think it is a major factor. You know, she becomes so desperate to preserve her self-concept that she will literally do anything. You know, nothing becomes out of bounds for her. Hopefully the way that sort of plays out is compelling and interesting and yeah, humanizing. You know, it's not just crime isn't just something monsters do. There's a line in the book, is, you know, a country is made of many things, including its crimes. I think it's important for us to think about where they come from and what we can do to make it better.
So I'm really intrigued by Alfie. So Alfie is another protagonist in the novel. That she enrolls to initially commit the crime before she realizes she's got to take matters into her own hands. But I found the portrait of him incredibly sympathetic is the wrong word, insightful. And, you know, and his arc is such a revelation of all of these interlaced injustices and, you know, the compound effect of systemic violence, right? And there's this incredible lightness that you inject into the humanity of the character, which was remarkably drawn. And I was, you know, so tell us a little bit about writing that character, and because obviously that wouldn't have been part of the main reporting on the incident at the time.
Absolutely.
Or maybe I'm making a
No, you are 100% right. He was the character that I mostly had to create out of, you know, very little documentary evidence. Sorry, I'm just still blushing from all the nice things you just said. But
it's a good thing you've got a full beard.
You know, interestingly, he has a little peek behind the curtain. The first draft, the first version of this book actually didn't have his perspective in it. It was told entirely from Lorraine's point of view. Because, you know, obviously I felt complicated about taking on that voice. It's a voice so different to my own. But I hated that first version of the book. You know, it was half the story. It needed, you know, so Lorraine's point of view needed to be counterbalanced by Alfie's. And so that's, you know, why I in the end felt emboldened to go for it. And yes, in terms of what you were saying, again, you know, Wabi Long makes this point that, like, you know, kind of absolute poverty is one thing, but relative poverty is something entirely different. And so when there's this kind of, you know, sort of extremely cynical, all of these forces that sort of have caused him disgrace and shame, you know, often through no fault of his own, that became an interesting character. And then because life is made of all kinds of things, you know, I enjoyed adding a but yeah, kind of a brevity. He has a great sense of humor, I think, and I think that serves to bond him to the reader, but also to make him more three-dimensional, you know, because people, as Caryn was saying, the resilience is hopefully something that you really take from that character.
Thanks. So I thought, I mean, obviously reading your bio a little bit, we haven't met before, so I don't know you from above. So, but obviously you've been in that world yourself of music making and DJing, and presumably growing up in a similar circumstance. So yeah, so just, I mean, what was the writing of that texture like for you?
I think it's really interesting to be seated with the non-fiction versus fiction element, and that it's literary fiction, Ghost in the Drum, but it's heavily based on a couple of experiences, some of my musical experiences, but really about a friend of mine who's late, and stories relayed. And I guess the fiction becomes my trying to step into the moment that I wasn't there, you know. But it's real.
Yeah.
That's the thing. A lot of it is very much, it happened. So it's not,
Yeah.
And the precision was trying to bring people into the world, into the moment, and try to connect them to it with detail beyond what I was told maybe, as well as my personal experiences. So it ended up being a melange of...
And, you know, so it's one of the best things I've read on South African urbanity, because, you know, so for example, that scene where you talk about the street party kind of thing, and he's only 12 and he has his first experience, and of course the massive consequence the next morning when his dad moors him about it. But, you know, but just that, the sort of, the way you bring the electricity of that moment to life in that story, and how you transplant the reader into that setting, I mean, it was incredible.
What I really, the way I meant to answer the question was that the way that I met this friend of mine, this great dear late friend of mine, was that I was interviewing him as a journalist, as a music journalist, as a fan, and my first rendering of the picture was very shallow, very kind of glamorizing. And this then, Ghost in the Drum, was me being like, after knowing him from the first day of meeting him through, you know, the decade of knowing him, you know, what is the truth of this supposedly, you know, like someone from the township is playing all over the world. It's this exciting thing. It's in the newspaper. It's in the Argus. It's in the Pitori Time. But what is the day-to-day reality of it?
Yeah. And I guess it's so prescient at the moment with the Amapiano blowing up, and, you know, I mean, there's waves and waves of that story unfolding in front of our eyes. And this kind of brings me to the next question, which is related to Nthato, what you've just mentioned. And it's this idea that, you know, sort of understanding violence and alienation is really about exploring what is the threads between socialization, right, culture, identity, and then how that gets mediated by institutions, right, whether it's the police, whether it's education, whether it's religion, and then, of course, place, right, location. So what was interesting across the three books is masculinity. It comes through very, very powerfully across in very different ways. You don't sort of deal with it as an upfront thing, but, you know, the sort of dominant disciplinarian father features in both of your novels, and in Lorraine's case, of course, it's a really, I guess, important driver of where she ends up psychologically. I was so curious about that dimension of the accounts that your main protagonist, the general, gives of himself in relation to his father. So it's kind of an exceptional example of an opposite positive experience, of a positive role model. having grown up in a similar community, I kind of have questions about that telling. But it just strikes me that, we've got to think about the family and religion and masculinity as one of the key dimensions of this condition. And they're across all our communities, right, irrespective of race and class, interestingly enough. I think it manifests differently in working class communities, but I think it is something that is really profound. And that then raises the question for me about, so all of you illuminate to help us understand better. Is the intention empathy, or is the intention just understanding, right? Because, so I got, TC infuriated me, right? Because, and this is why your novel is so fantastic. Like, you just, keep the reader with bad choice after bad choice after,
But
that
frustration is my personal frustration. I think the book being based on a composite of stories.
Yeah.
Something about a totally different person, like someone called DJ Mojava. In 2001, he had the song Township Funk, which took the world by storm. And around 2006, I met him. I was the beginner musician, and he was headlining the show in Berlin. And the meeting was very awkward, and it was kind of disregard for me. But later, to go deeper and deeper into story and to realize what I saw as him reaching that pinnacle of the music game, reaching that pinnacle, has just been pain after pain after pain after, up to, he's coming back now. And at the beginning then, there were all kinds of myths. Yeah. When I went in to do the documentary before doing the book, it was to dispel myths. He's passed away, he's been bewitched, someone put a nail into something and did a ritual on him. Somebody put something into the weed that he was smoking. So it's like being bewitched, and me trying to find a human truth out of his personal experience. And beyond all that mysticism and glamour.
Yeah. And why do you think the sort of the blowing up factor, the glamour, and I guess it's a lot more acute in Josie, but why is that something that you kind of feel needs to be demystified, right? What's...
I've had I think a painful experience of being in the music industry, having a lot of really positive experiences and understanding it to a degree, but not being able to communicate it to a 17-year-old because they purely see glamour. They purely see lights, And this was my attempt to try to demystify some stuff and be okay, you're waking up, this is this, this is this, this is this.
Right. It's a cruel world. In that sense, it's not all what it seems. Caryn, this question of socialization and gender identities, and and also most of the people you engage are men, right? In the system, except for the one police commissioner that was fleetingly in her post, but
Yeah, look, that song, This Is a Man's World? It often, it's very weird, but sometimes it just starts playing in my head. Because this is a man's world, let's be real. But yeah, there are certain aspects of what General Lincoln told me that I found fascinating, external to him. And the one was that, I'm trying to figure out, did all these people hate him? Was he set up? And he brought up something that was so obvious, and it made a lot of sense to me. He said, you mustn't forget that we are talking egos, because we are talking intel agents, police officers. He was into karate. So he was a physically strong individual. And he said this actually antagonized some of his colleagues, just appearance. So ego was actually, in fact, I wish we could measure ego, if there were an ego thermometer. Yes. Imagine if we could measure state capture and egos and see how that came about. So, yeah. And then I just wanted to touch on empathy versus understanding. I should have mentioned this earlier, but one of the reasons I really wanted to write Man Alone was because, very weirdly, and I've covered from fires to bouncers or doormen, nightclub security battles, to gang shootings, to cartels operating in, let's say, India, the US via South Africa, and then these politicians' names are involved. And throughout my career, General Lincoln's name kept surfacing. And in terms of understanding, what I wanted was to actually impart a holistic idea of who this person potentially was, because his life has been fragmented into very static, sterile media reports, which have sort of ebbed and flowed, but in the 1990s, he was basically viewed as a criminal, okay? And that sort of stuck with him throughout his career, and I think that really weighed on him. So I really wanted to impart the understanding that this is a hugely nuanced human, like every single one of us, and this is the impact of capture. This is the physical impact. This is what has happened to this individual. And then in terms of empathy, I never wrote with empathy in mind, and one of the, I think, something that helped me a lot was when General Lincoln said, "It's all good, you can do this," and I was like, oh no, what am I going to do? But he was very open to the idea that he is but one person in this broad matrix. So I felt that even though I'm telling a very big, broad, horrific reality, not a story, this is reality, through one person. I've used him sort of as a backbone here. It was to tell the broader story. So if you feel empathy towards anyone, the empathy isn't intentionally directed via me and my words.
Yeah. So that is really helpful, and also just to say, footnote, as a reader, your little charts and diagrams is extremely helpful, because it is impossible to keep track of all of the characters and how they intersect and how the alliances and rivalries evolve over time. So I don't know if it was your publisher, but it worked really well to stay the course. So thank you for that. But just to underscore that intention really comes through very powerfully in the book. But also that you then take the moments, your device towards the end where you contrast his farewell from SAPS when he retires and the community event, was really, it worked really, really well to kind of get that across. So, so mission accomplished. David, on this question of socialization and and also the source of Lorraine's obsession, of course, is Andre, who's this, who you draw in I guess, the least sympathetic way in the novel. He is an arsehole, so
Mission
get
accomplished
it.
then, yes.
There were these really interesting currents and layers in terms of, and there's something you do in the book where there's a lot of very subtle allusions to things, but you don't explore things, and you kind of leave a lot for the reader to fill in, which is wonderful and annoying at the same time, because you kind of want to know more of the backstory, right? And that incident where her mom goes ballistic and throws all the cutlery, it is such a literally shattering moment, and why? What happened? What triggered it? And of course, you never reveal your secrets, but you're dealing with very different things at different layers. The story of Alfie's painful trajectory, because he also one leg gets amputated in the novel, and her protagonist also suffers the same fate for medical reasons later in his life. You kind of conjure the forced removals and the sort of the landscapes, the ruins it leaves in its wake. And that's a very particular slice through. And then Andre's, how he treats his wife and his family, and you know, the ordentelijke man, right? And then her own, I mean, these are all very different lenses in. So you obviously thought a lot about those questions, right?
Yeah, 100%. You know, what fascinated me, if you think of it as like a power triangle right in the center of the, you know, a deadly power triangle in the center of the book, what really interested me was that in her relationship with Alfie, Lorraine is ultra dominant, powerful, able to manipulate, etc. But then when she's with Andre, she's desperate, and she is, you know, on that power dynamic is reversed. I just found that very interesting. You know, it kind of just naturally creates layers where, yes, you know, often it's, you know, her sense of herself is so bound up in what, you know, in his acceptance. When that is thwarted or spurned, you know, she immediately turns and sort of can take that out on someone else. It's yes, it's a very complicated situation, and it's the kind of power dynamics that I think that you know, it's of course hardest on Alfie. He bears the brunt of this, but it's mutually debasing. It's, you know, it's not good for Lorraine either. You know, to be able to wield that kind of power in such a reckless, wanton sort of way, childish way. I mean, she's only she's, you know, she's only 18 at the time of this of the events. Yeah.
Just so on this point, there's two horrific moments in the novel, right? The one where Andre, as a doctor, is performing his job and he has to do the measurements, right, for Alfie under Lorraine's insistence because of his amputated legs. And the utter disdain and disregard for that patient because the patient is black. And then the scene where Alfie gets tortured by the police when he's picked up after he tried to warn Andre's wife. I guess it's, you know, what struck me about that, it was an insight into normalized violence in that time in South Africa's life that is not, you know, the writ large of, you know, MK bases attacked or, you know, we're being battened in the streets, but it's a different, much more dramatic in some ways and insidious form of violence. And yeah, just the sort of sensitivity of having a story arc of these complex interrelationships, but then to not shirk away from that, I thought worked really well in the novel. I want to ask the two of you, because you're both musicians, so I'm so interested.
Oh, don't call me a musician compared to him.
No.
That's embarrassing to me.
And you're also a filmmaker. So last question before we open up to the floor. I'm so curious how those disciplines and crafts infuse your writing. Maybe Nthato, we can start with you.
I guess the more than drawing towards the similarity of the crafts, I distinguish them by saying the writing needs an incredible amount of precision, vastly different amount of precision than music I enjoy. Okay. You know, I prefer a wildness, a sense of chaos, a human imperfection, a messy something
in your music.
Off in and I'm free in that way in music. I can go studio, close my eyes and like do something, but with writing it's not that kind of craft. Okay. Close your eyes and do something. No.
Try it for the next novel. It's amazing. Okay, David?
Yeah, for me, there's this quote by a 19th century essayist called Walter Pater that goes basically, all art constantly aspires to the condition of music. And I take that very seriously. Like the sound of words is really important to me. So I sweat a lot over the way, the rhythm, the sound of sentences. I hope that that's where the musical influence comes. Hopefully it's on the page somehow, yeah.
So Caryn, I'm just going to assume there's no way you can also do music, because I don't know how you could have done 2 books, have a full-time gig, and, so there's like, I'm just not prepared to accept that you have even more talents in your bag.
Look,
So,
I can
but
play
in case you do.
that drum thing, that rain drum. I can't remember the name now, but I can tap that. But I actually just wanted to say, I'm so with you, because writing is so linear. So I enjoy things where you can just let your mind be. So painting, anything that allows for non-rigid linear thinking, I love. So, oh yes. Maybe I should go into music.
Thank you. So we now have an occasion to invite you to ask a question, make a comment. I've got one here, one there. The microphones, I think, are making their way down. And one in front, noted. Okay. So there was someone there with a hand? Yeah, just if you can maybe start, and then microphone here, 3rd row, 3rd seat, and then to the front. Please, sir.
Thanks to all the panelists. I think the answer to my question is obviously going to be yes, but I want to find out the ways in which it's a yes. So how has writing these books influenced the way you see yourself transitioning through space and cities? And how has it affected you? Has it transformed you in any way? And I ask this out of sort of an interest as a student of urban spaces, and how we can better make spaces that are accommodating to humans by telling stories that effectively all our stories happen in an urban context or in space, right? And most of those stories happen in an urban context in the 21st century. So I'm interested to know how your experience of your urban spaces and your cities has changed through the writings that you've put out into the world.
Do you mind sharing your name with us?
Vumani.
Vumani, thank you. Please? Yeah, so we'll just collect the 3 and then we'll respond.
Can I just riff off Vumani's question, actually? So my question is around the aesthetic of violence in your books, and how, I guess, particularly the spatial aesthetics, how you actually wrote the city into your books, but also the violence of the post-apartheid city or the apartheid city, and how you actually thought about space and also its aesthetics. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks. One here in front. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. One of the best panels so far. I just came back from the UK for a month, and when I'm at Open Book, I realized South Africa has better storytellers, and the books that are published here are like more in depth and are so brilliant in their own way and deserve such a bigger readership. And I have this deep frustration with South Africans. I mean, I know that most of us can't afford books fundamentally, but also I think that those that can don't. And there's something deeply like frustrating and annoying about that. And I think for you guys to put out such good work about such relevant and kind of thing without knowing that a readership is kind of in waiting or doesn't exist yet, and that must affect you. And I wonder how much of an act of faith your writing is, knowing that it's like, you know, what readership do you imagine? And is it just like one person at a time, you know?
Okay, your name, please.
Sorry, Cameron.
Cameron, and Laura asked the second question. So 3 lovely, meaty, juicy questions for you to bite into.
Yeah, the act of faith, I guess, to go from the last question, there's a sense of an idea whose time has come, and I think coming from a journalistic background, I'm sure there's a real sense that the story has to be told. There are these bits that have an interest. No? Isn't there, aren't newspapers, tales and juicy stories evidence of interest? And for me, with my story about Disela and doing the documentary, I had a sense that, no, my personal interest in the story was enough to know that, yeah, it's interesting and it needs to be elucidated to some extent.
Yeah. I was going to answer your question, and I forgot what your question
The
is.
question
So
was
it
about how traversing space, and do you,
Oh, yes. Sorry,
how
got
that
it,
is
got
written
it.
in the novel.
So, like, I feel the weight of my responsibility as a journalist a lot more at the moment. It does feel much weightier, and the book changed my understanding of things. So now I really feel that I need to step up and hold people to account, and yeah, use what I can do to change things. And then very quickly, one thing that I really try to get across in the book about writing or spaces, etc., is to emphasize that gang violence and gangsterism does not necessarily equal the same thing. And a gangster is not necessarily someone sitting in the Cape Flats with a firearm, and the gangster could actually be the person, well, but we know the gangster is the person sitting in a boardroom or an office, and that's always been the case. So I've tried to, and I'm going to use your word because I really liked it, I've tried to demystify those preconceived ideas that this is gangsterism, it's people shooting on the Cape Flats. It's what's happening in offices, it's what's happening around us.
100%.
Thank you.
David?
Yes, I'll try hit all three very quickly. In terms of how it's changed my relationship to the cities I live in, it's made me genuinely more kind of aware of the insidious nature of how spatial politics is, it is a form of violence. I live now in Westdean in Johannesburg, around the corner is Town. So it's, another example, just I walk past it every day and you can just, the history's right there. And, there was this session on trauma, I think yesterday, called The Body Keeps the Score, which is obviously Bessel van der Kolk work. But like cities certainly keep the score, these things, these edifices are built and they don't move, and we've got to keep interacting them. There's a kind of an intergenerational aspect to it. So yes, great question, and it's one of the things that I sort of really kind of enjoyed about the book was opening my eyes to this more. And just very quickly, in terms of the aesthetic of it, yes, trying to just be kind of like again, aware of what was going on. I hope the book, the voice is aware of the 70s, but it's not of the 70s, not 100%. I think there's a bit of a gap there, a bit of a distance that allows the reader, as Edgar was suggesting, to sort of just witness, really, without too much judgment. And then finally, yes, it is completely an act of faith, but I find that that's quite freeing as well. There's no... there are no expectations. I would have written this book whether it is ever going to be published or not. I'm so grateful that I found a publisher who was willing to take it on, really. No.
Thanks so much.
Can I make a note on cities and perception of cities? I think this is my first time in Cape Town since publishing, and an aspect of Disela's journey is his discovery of urban Johannesburg, from, dealing with Pretoria, township Pretoria, urban Pretoria, and that distance. Where is he welcome? Where is he absolutely, shut out of Johannesburg? And then the level of Cape Town. And for Disela, Cape Town being this glamorous thing for Gauteng people, from the natural beauty to a sense of the economic state of Cape Town, but getting here and seeing the reality, the depth and extent of homelessness, of mental illness without support, coming from the side of seeing Cape Town as, ooh la la, Kaapstad, it is a bit of a shock. And so I wrote it, TC's first time in Cape Town, but this was my first time coming back and really seeing it. So it's been really transformative for my understanding of space in that way.
And just to say that TC moves between Etridgeville, downtown Pretoria, fancy parts of Joburg, and
in the same way, Paris,
exactly,
he sees the Romani homelessness there,
Yeah.
and that's also another sense of,
Yeah.
oh shit, this
Yeah.
glamour of Paris
Yeah.
is also
Exactly.
debased by
Yeah.
global.
And in fact, I mean, he's, you've got this fantastic kind of comical situation where his hotel is the same name as what a street is called in French. And between him and the taxi driver that doesn't understand English, like there is this comedy of errors, and at some point he just says, fuck it, and he
True
gets
story.
out. Exactly, and he walks. And so I think there's such a, it's so vivid, right? And obviously almost your main protagonist in the story are the taxis, right? And the taxi rank. It's such a powerful and evocative anchor for the novel. It's incredible, yeah. Okay, so we've got 2 minutes left, so there's no point to pretend we can get a question and get answers. So I'm just going to ask each of our panelists, what's next? What's next? And then we'll go and have a drink. So David, you go first this time. What's next?
Always working on something new. Right now, there are 2 projects that are vying for my attention. One is very much set in Joburg. The other one is set in KZN in the 90s. Yes, I'm more details to follow.
Okay. Nice and enticing, Caryn.
Firstly, sleep, and then
Good.
I'm really hoping to write something, or I really hope to do a book on the true faces of organized crime in South Africa. And by the true faces, I mean the people who still control the drug trade through South Africa. I do know that if I were to write it now, I'd probably be murdered, but I've already started, so let's see where this goes.
Okay.
I think that is a big point. I mean, this afternoon before the panel, I visited Koketso Sechan, and he was running me through your book and telling me more about you. And what I spoke to immediately was your bravery to speak out in this nation. Could you talk to what it takes to? Yeah, because it's not about censors. It's not about censors anymore, but it's what does it take?
More.
Yeah.
To not be scared to talk.
Yeah.
To speak the truth.
I don't know what it takes because I'm still doing it, but I can say that afterwards.
No, but you've done it, Caryn.
I'm still doing it. I'm still doing it. I'm writing about people every day. And the thing is, I don't know who I'm truly writing about. So someone can be arrested, but we don't actually know who's the puppet master, who the puppet master is. But but I'm scared a lot. So, people are like, oh, you're so brave. I'm not brave. We just can't allow this, and I'm not going to, so, meh. Now I've got to live up to this. Oh no.
Nthato.
Yeah, I've been very excitedly working on a piece from before Ghost in the Drum, can't say albatross, but a very difficult project that scared me out of writing it for a while. Speculative fiction horror based in the Northern Cape. And
Cool.
yeah,
Okay.
I was hoping to present it on this trip, but that's what I'm very lovingly dipped
Beautiful.
into.
Okay, sounds fantastic. So KZN, Northern Cape, our geographies are shifting for the next cycle. So what a pleasure and what an honor it's been to be in conversation with you. And what a gift to all of us that you've brought these incredible things into the world. And, it's kind of really wonderful to be reminded just how beautiful it is to sit with a book and not read it on your Kindle. So it was also just really nice to spend very, very intimate time with you the last 2-3 weeks. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.